Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. There's a lot of very important things that we need to talk about today. Let me start off with introductions. My name is Henry Park. I'm co-founder and executive partner over at Pandoblox. We're a company that focuses on providing tools and services to build digital businesses. Cybersecurity is a huge problem for all companies, whether you've made that turn into being a digital business or not. Pretty much everyone's affected these days on what's going on with the cyber security issues that have been proliferating based on all of the work from home initiatives and companies just having to deal with so much data in the cloud. One of the things that I think really differentiates us in the market when it comes to security is that we look at security holistically. And when we say holistically, we look at the business and not just in the general terms of the business, but really from a business model perspective, really understanding the key drivers of the business and interweaving security into it. And so you'll see that, everything we do in our digital initiatives and business consulting and business modeling and architecting will include security into it. It's not a separate thing that we do as a separate practice. And the security technology itself is just a very small part of it. For us, we look at the four pillars that we look at is business modeling, data, company culture, and then infrastructure. And we pretty much look at it in that order. So a big differentiator, majority of our competition is looking at security infrastructure. So it's a lot of technology and tooling, or they'll focus on the data, or they'll focus on training. And all those things need to be layered together and interconnected together around the business itself. And so it's a very different approach, and we've had some really nice case studies that we could share with you down the road. So why are we doing this? Well, it's surprising to see that a lot of companies they don't realize how much effort needs to be coordinated to respond to a security breach and the short amount of time that you have to get it done. When a lot of companies come to us to start putting together a roadmap, this is one of the first things that we work with our clients on, and it's just one of those things that when it comes to an executive strategy, it's not something that you really want to focus in on. I mean, there's so many things to operate a business, and this is one of those things that you just hope that you won't have to deal with. But once you're there, the amount of coordination that happens in that crisis situation is like this boat over here. It's a team effort. Everyone needs to know what they're doing and what roles they're playing because you have a short amount of time. 24 to 48 hours is about the average. There's some people here who've had experiences where the turnaround time had to be in minutes, in 1 to 4 hours, not 24 to 48 hours. I think they would say that's a luxury. And so, yeah, the response time is incredibly important. And in order to achieve those short times and respond in a responsible fashion, there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen. And so we put together this best practices sheet. It's years and years of experience dealing with cybersecurity at both national and global levels. Bob Van Dusen, our CISO and executive partner, he was the head of security over at Blizzard Entertainment for 15 years and really even started that security practice over there back when cybersecurity wasn't really that big of a thing. They were one of the first companies to go global in a SaaS platform for media entertainment, and so they were just dealing with a lot of first-time cybersecurity type incidents. And so after dealing with that for so many years, there's been a lot of best practices that he's compiled onto this best practices sheet that we'd like to share with all of our friends and clients here. So very short amount of time, and not every situation is going to require all of these departments to interact with each other. It depends on where the security breach starts. But we wanted to cover this in a playbook fashion so that everyone can see how the teams need to interact. And we've gotten together a very experienced and talented panel here from various different departments. Roberto Orsi from communications, Sylvia from the HR department as a CHRO, Jim here as a CIO and very experienced CIO, having security underneath him, and Bob as CISO. And so we wanted to go through this and really get everyone to understand how the interaction needs to be, and what are some of the things that you have to consider to coming up with a playbook like this. So there's some serious topics we're going to go over today. We want to keep it light. And so what we want to do is start off by introducing ourselves, but also mention something regarding cybersecurity from a personal basis, whether it's big or small, that we could share. I'll start with something a little embarrassing. Me being in the tech space and digital space, something I don't tell a lot of people is that I have a lot of cryptocurrency, and I put a lot of my investments there. But when it comes to cybersecurity with my crypto, I actually keep it as a pen and paper with my cryptographic keys written on paper, stored in my safe. So I know I should go digital with that, but that's just how I like it. And it's easy to tell my wife where to go. So that's me. But let's do the introductions. In popcorn fashion, I just learned that it was mentoring some UCLA kids on a design sprint, but it's called popcorn. So I'm gonna point at someone after you introduce yourself and say a little something about your cybersecurity weird things. You can point to the next person to introduce. So I'm gonna go with Sylvia.
There you go. So sorry about that. Good afternoon. I'm Sylvia Van Dusen. I'm the CHRO. Good thing I'm not the technical person since I started out in mute. I've been an HR leader for 20 plus years. I have multiple experience. Currently, I'm with a defense contractor. I have experience in all types of industries and in all types of different areas of HR, industries including manufacturing, banking, consumer goods, health, medical industries. And one of the stories that comes to mind all the time when I think about a cyber incident is when you have your CISO walk into your office with your legal person and say, hey, we have lost a computer that is not encrypted. And an engineer checked it into the airport with their baggage, and the baggage is lost. So it just goes to show you that you sometimes have a very small amount of information to deal with, and now you're all of a sudden with very little control trying to find information and secure your systems. So that's my story. And in popcorn fashion, I'm going to turn it over to Roberto.
Thank you, Sylvia. My name is Roberto Orsi. So my background is in marketing. I started off at Procter & Gamble as a brand manager, and then I moved into advertising in Canada and Mexico and the US. And really interesting categories: energy, financial, insurance, aerospace and defense, and fintech, as well as packaged goods. And currently I head up strategic growth at a digital first advertising agency. And so my story is, I was in my office and the CFO was kind of walking around, and I could tell he was moody. I ran into him in the break room and he wouldn't look me in the eye. And I go back to my office, and then he comes in and says, "Look, we have a procedure for approving and processing invoices. And I don't think it's right that you send me an invoice out of the blue and tell me to pay it by the end of the day. And you've done that twice today." And he says, and on top of that, some of the other executives are asking for gift cards, which we use for employees, and they want me to send them off to all these other partners and vendors, and it doesn't make any sense. Turns out somebody had hacked our email. They have our addresses. They knew all about us, and they were sending him orders to send all these invoices. And it was in the tens of thousands of dollars. So we quickly cleared that up, had our IT team come in and clear that up. So it happens in big breaches and small breaches. And I'm happy to be part of this team today. And in popcorn fashion, I want to hand it over to Bob.
Thanks, Roberto. Hi, my name's Bob Van Dusen. I've been in IT for about 30 years and partnered up with Henry. So I'm an executive partner and CISO with Pandoblox and a founder. I have a wide range of industries as well: banking, electrical manufacturing, gaming, CPG, and e-commerce. The majority of my career, as Henry mentioned, was at Blizzard Entertainment. I started out in charge of IT globally, and that went on for a few years, and we launched a few games. And I guess my cybersecurity story is how I got into professionally into cybersecurity. It's always been a hobby of mine. I've always kept up to date on it in detail, played around with it. And when we were launching games, I used to mention that, there were some security issues, and that went on for a year or so. And the CEO at the time, one time turned to me and said, "Well, you got a point. Let's start a security practice." And so that started the security practice with myself and an existing employee. And by the time I left, it was about 40 people in security for Blizzard when I had left. So it was a lot of experience, a lot of times at the point of a gun, with all the things that were coming our way. So that's my story and my background. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim Renaldi.
Hi, everyone. I am Jim Renaldi. Currently, I'm the Chief Information Technology Advisor for Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Prior to that, though, I was for 14 years, plus I was the CIO, and experienced many very positive and also some cyber threats and incidents that I had to manage through and report on. And so I have, unfortunately, too much experience in that regard. As you can imagine, a place like Jet Propulsion Laboratory and the things that we do, like rovers on Mars and Earth reconnaissance type for science spacecraft, we're popular, and sometimes we're too popular. And nation states, as well as smart 14-year-olds, will try to find holes in our systems. And so I've had many experience with that, and hopefully you can share some of my experience and what we've gone through. My history, I have been in many industries as well. I spent 16 years at Marriott International. I also was CIO at Food and Drug Administration prior to JPL, and of course now I've been 16 years with Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So thank you for having me. I look forward to the discussion. And Henry, I'll turn it back to you.
We're going to get into Q&A. I'm going to be moderating here. I've got a bunch of questions that I want to ask you. both individually, and I know there's a lot of questions here where there'll be both sides to it or triple sides to it, where everyone will have their own opinion on things. And so please feel free to jump in if I'm directing a question to someone and you guys have input. We want this to be a free-flowing conversation. And for the attendees here, if there's any questions that you have, please post them on chat. Would love to try to get around to all of the questions here. It's really important that we get the full range of what we need to prepare for a breach response plan. So, but I want to start with Sylvia, not just because ladies first, but because the HR side of things are so important to prepare for in a breach. And yeah, if you're not prepared for it, man, you can get into lots of trouble. From the HR side of things, what are some of the things that you would have to prepare for?
I think the first and foremost is really to plan ahead and work with your counterparts inside when it comes down to the crisis security incident plan, and be prepared. Some of the things that happen during an event is often that you have to onboard people. You may have to start an internal investigation due to an insider threat, or sometimes a bad actor, or sometimes you just know that the situation happened because of a human error. You need to be able to have your team ready to onboard people quickly and well, because in these situations, you have to bring in the right people at the right time. And you also have to really, when you think about preparation, is to talk about training and having your people ready to react. So it's not just the fact that, because it's one of those things similar to fighting a fire. If you wait until you have a fire to learn how to use the fire extinguisher, you're probably not going to be as successful unless you have had some experience using that fire extinguisher.
Yeah, yeah, great analogy, and definitely, there's so many things that you could practice and get trained on. What are some of the things that you found to be the most effective?
Some of the things that I have implemented in my career in conjunction with working with IT has been, phishing exercises, insider threat training, how to identify and how to report insider threat training, insider threats that you may see. So that applies to your whole population of team members. There's also the training on preventing leaks outside of your organization, so people know when there's a situation that is critical in the organization, how to keep things contained. And really, communications, working hand in hand with the communications group to make sure that inside communications are well, and having people train to work with communications when that message has to be delivered. Because you don't just put somebody in front of the media, as an example, without having them be already trained to do so.
Yeah, okay. And you mentioned internal threats, and I think one of the things that a lot of people who aren't in the security space don't realize is that the majority of the security issues are actually internal. It's, people imagine that it's, people from Russia, China getting in and externally getting into to breach the network and systems or whatnot, but it's majority of the time it's internal. What are some processes and protocols to prepare you in case you have an internal personnel responsible for the security leak?
You have to really have a robust process for investigations with your people. And this is not one of those things that HR does alone. You have to be working with the right people in the organization, IT, security, communication, sometimes the affected department. And you need to know how to work together and kind of do the dance together. It needs to be really considered, because there's a process for investigating individuals. Sometimes you have to wait until you see more evidence, and you have to wait to talk with your IT department and make sure that you're gathering the right evidence before you even take any action. So I believe a robust investigation process that is really coordinated well internally with all the stakeholders in the organization that are appropriate for that situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's say that you have an internal leak, internal situation, and then you have an internal leak, and it goes viral. What do you do then?
I think I would call Roberto.
Well, good thing he's here.
That's right. I think that Roberto has a great way to. This is where I would team up with my counterpart in the communication side and the risk side on that side.
Well, let's get over to Roberto, if you don't mind. I like the flow, how this is going, and there's all of these things intertwine together, and so it's definitely not the initial flow that I was thinking, but it's the natural flow. In the event of a cyber breach, how quickly should a company respond, Roberto? Like, is there like a general rule of thumb, or?
That's a really good question, Henry, because I think you have to assume that everybody will know within hours. In fact, if you think about some recent cases, Facebook and Instagram had a problem. They literally went down, and it's impossible to keep it out of the public eye. Or imagine that you are a utility, gas, electric, and you have a power outage in a city or even larger. It doesn't take long for the word to get out something's going on. And then you add to that the ubiquitous social media where people are commenting, telling everybody. There's a 24-hour news cycle nowadays because everything is online. So the thing is that the only way to control the news is to control the narrative. That's why you need to be out immediately when something happens.
Okay. How do you control the narrative?
I think Sylvia used the word pre-plan. And the reason you want to do that is because you want to convey a sense of confidence that the company has everything under control. So there are different scenarios that might, more likely scenarios that might happen in the event of a breach or crisis. And if you plan those scenarios, then you can plan messaging for each of those scenarios. And beyond planning what that is, you have to plan, how am I going to disseminate the message? So for example, you have your owned media, your website, you might have some social media channels. You have earned media, which is PR. So you're going to get the media calling you, or you should actually be reaching out to them first. And you may even have to use paid media where you tell your stakeholders what's going on and what you're doing to fix the situation. And that all those are really important, that they be planned and ready to hit at that. Literally you push the button and everything starts.
And Henry, if I could add to that, because I think I agree with that process. I think the information that comes from the investigation of the breach has to be very fact-based and not as speculative, so that the focus becomes about, here's the facts we know. We will, depending on how you want to communicate it, we will update you as we know more. And the fact, and what people like Roberto would need to know from IT, for example, or from the cybersecurity team is, what's the nature of it? What should we communicate? When will we know? And this be in the loop of that whole process, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great insights here. So shifting over to the IT department, should the remediation for a cybersecurity breach, should it be treated as a project?
I think in most cases, I have trouble thinking of a case where it wouldn't be smart to treat it as a project, so that you at least have tracking and you have historical, you have lessons learned, and you have a formal process that you can count on. And so I think the answer is yes. I would definitely treat remediation. Most of the time, you have a lot of interested parties. Could be auditors, could be legal, could be others, and you want to make sure that they are confident in the process and that the remediation actually it worked and can do the best it can to prevent a future breach.
Got it. There's so many departments that need to be collaborated with for a situation like this. How does IT engage these proper organizations involved in the incident?
Well, I think, and Sylvia mentioned it earlier, I think first get with the areas that may be most impacted or that the breach occurred in, and work with them in somewhat responsible fashion, such that you're not expanding the scope and getting everybody involved who doesn't need to be involved. So if you have a problem within the financial area, work with the financial area to get their input, get their as much data as you can. Because if you're doing an investigation, and Bob could talk about this as well, that you need to make sure that the forensics team that's doing that is really focused and really getting the facts that they need. After that, though, you still need to keep in partnership. I did anyway, as I kept the legal team. I brought them in pretty early to make sure that they kept in lockstep. If it were a very public type of thing, I would certainly have the communications team right with me. And if there were issues that would really called on HR to be a part of it, that we have an HR issue, then I would certainly include them right away. But there could also be certainly other departments, like, if you're in a product company, you may want the product manager certainly involved. In our case, you may want the mission manager if it was that dire and had mission impact. So you have to use good judgment in this, but you also have to have a plan of communications and escalation and when you do that. One final note is I had a rule that I had to inform not only the senior leadership, but the board of trustees if a breach was serious enough to warrant that kind of level of communication.
Wow. What types of cyber incidents have you seen the most of?
Typically, they come in multiple ways, but poorly formed website was one of the most popular ways. Phishing, as Sylvia indicated, certainly has gotten more sophisticated. I forgot to tell my little embarrassing story that I was physically on a call with the NASA CISO and deputy CISO, and NASA was doing a phishing campaign on us at JPL, and I fell for it because I was distracted, as was my excuse, and I gave my credentials and everything else, and so my penance was I had to take additional training, and it was embarrassing, to be honest with you, but people laughed it off because they got me. But there are multiple things that can create avenues of attack, and you certainly could plan for most. You could try to have prevention technologies and capabilities in place, but those are the things I've seen the most impact. We have seen what Sylvia experienced, where laptops that were not encrypted for whatever reason or got decrypted were lost, and that includes devices, and some of those even made the news. And how do you prepare for educating people on what to take? For example, if you were traveling internationally, we would not allow you to take your device, your JPL device. You'd have to take a loaner device that was cleaned before and after it returned. And those are just examples of how we treated the cyber world.
Yeah, wow, that's some extreme steps, but I understand why, and I want to catch Bob off guard with this because I know he's not going to jump in with examples of his own. But what are some of the interesting cyber incidents that you're able to talk about that you've seen?
Well, I'll bounce off of what Jim was just talking about, traveling internationally. I did a lot of traveling with Blizzard, and we did have some issues in China especially when we were traveling. And there was one time where I had asked my team to give me a brand new laptop, and I took that laptop with me. I didn't turn it on. Just left it in my hotel room. I was there for a little under 2 weeks. And keep in mind, I did not turn this on. I brought it back with me and had them scan it, and there was a bunch of malware on there. So evidently what had happened was that there was somebody in my hotel room during my meetings when I was out and about. So yeah, there's some scary stuff out there, and there's, Henry, there's plenty of stories that I've told you about. So
yeah, no, I gotta get some more drinks in you. So there's I think a lot of companies, executives, they think cybersecurity is a concern for just big companies. What's your opinion, Bob? Like, should companies big and small both have cybersecurity strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. If you just think about it from a logical standpoint, Sylvia kind of alluded to it with the fire extinguisher analogy. If you go through and you can identify what the risks are to your business, because they're going to vary in the predictability of them happening as well as the probability of them happening. And if you can walk through that with your counterparts, I'll give you an example. In PR at Blizzard, we went through all of the possible scenarios, figured out what the probability of each of them happening. And for the top, 5 or so, we actually went through an exercise and said, okay, this just happened. And let's go through the exercise. What would we do in PR, for example? And we actually had a whole bunch of pre-canned PR releases. They'd have to be, scrubbed and doctored. But the point is, and getting back to your question, if you're prepared in a crisis situation like that, where chaos kind of takes over, the people that have taken a look at it and said, what are we going to do in that situation, and prepared, are going to come out much, much better than the ones that fly by the seat of their pants.
Henry, to add to Bob's, because I really think that's insightful. One thing to consider, that I don't know if small companies to large companies have an enterprise risk management plan. And in that risk management, you might want to include cyber risks. Therefore, you have visibility into what the remediation or what the plan is for each one of those risks, and that's how we do it. It becomes where the highest risk certainly gets a lot of attention, but it does put some formality to what's the risk for the enterprise.
I would add one thing to that, Henry, and that is that Bob mentions having those different scenarios identified. A key aspect of the next step is that you have identified who is going to do what and in what order. And that includes internal partners as well as external partners. You might be a small firm and you have all your communications handled internally, or you might have a PR firm, a communications firm, a digital firm, and everybody has to know what their role is, what content they're supposed to get out, and with some doctrine, obviously, based on the exact situation. but that's a key part of it so that you can respond in hours or even in minutes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Great.
if I may add to that, it's also, the availability of people. There has to be a backup for every person. And unfortunately, some of these things happen on Saturday and Sundays. And you have to have people available to contact people and to get people back into the office or online to help. And that's where the team has to know who's doing what, and everybody has to have a backup.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel bad for the people involved in that on a Sunday.
Well, usually if it's a targeted attack, the targeted attack is going to happen after business hours. We've had at a couple places that I've worked, we've had an advanced persistent threat, and the activity happened well after hours. So it wasn't actually observed. So
Wow.
that is a good point, and very probable that it'll happen off hours.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about if a company doesn't have the resources, smaller company, they don't have the expertise. Not a lot of companies, they don't have, the luxury of having all of your experiences under the executive management, right? And I think this is a question for all of you from your individual perspectives. What would you plan for? What would you tell that company that doesn't have all of the resources? What are the most important things individually that you guys think would be key for them to prepare for? So let's start off with you, Bob.
I think finding the partners ahead of time that can fill those gaps for you. And I'll give you an example. Even at Blizzard, we had a fairly big security team, and forensics, especially in a situation like that, it takes a specialized type of person. And we didn't necessarily have work for that person where we could actually fulfill a role. So we needed to go out and find a partner to do that. We had a situation that came up, and I had to go out and get somebody immediately. And I ended up paying quite a bit of money per hour for that individual. But I learned my lesson. And after that, I went out and partnered with a vendor that could provide that ahead of time and put them on a small retainer, and was able to get, the hourly costs down by a fraction. I think it was probably a sixth of what, a fifth of what it would have cost originally. So finding those vendors ahead of time is really important, and to fill those gaps if you don't have them internally.
Mm-hmm. Sylvia, what about you? What are some of the things that are really key if a company doesn't have a full-on CHRO and a whole team in their HR department to help them through this? What are some of the key things you think they should do?
I do second what Bob said about making sure you understand what you don't have and be ready to partner with outside firms or whatever works for you. It could be other partners to identify at the very least what you don't have. From a people perspective, I think there's some basics that you should put in place no matter what your size is. You should have some confidentiality agreements. You should have some training. There's some things that even if you're, besides just being a company of one, once you have that second person, there's some things that you should have in place, and identifying those early on in your company size and being consistent as to how you apply it, I think is really important, because it has to be scalable as you start to grow and your risk start becoming higher.
Great. What about you, Roberto? what are some things from a communication standpoint you think just key to have?
I think the first thing is if you identify who your stakeholders are, who would have to be notified? Is it customers? Is it vendors? Is it consumers broadly? And based on that, you would say, okay, who do I need? There might be a first pass of people within the organization who would talk to some key stakeholders. But then if you need to go broader than that, then who would be the right partner? Is it a PR firm? Is it a digital agency? And then you identify them and do exactly what Bob said, which is pre-plan, pre-negotiate, put them on a small retainer. In some cases, you may not even need to put on a retainer. It may just be a project basis, but be ready to push the button.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear you talk about, identifying the stakeholders, and it goes back to what Jim was saying before about identifying the business risk, because that's the key thing that we've noticed is a lot of companies, they don't look at this as a business risk situation. They look at it as a technology risk situation, or a departmental issue, but it really it maps to all the different drivers of the business and could affect all of them. So really liked what you said there. What about you, Jim? Company doesn't have a CIO and a security team. What are some of the basics that you think they would?
Well, I think, first of all, if you have a small workforce that handles your IT, they probably you need to think about them also being skilled or trained in some of the aspects of cyber. So if they write code or if they configure hardware, that they have, it's some of the basics down so that they can start with that help. But second thing is you probably have some form of an agreement with a software provider and maybe more and more is becoming cloud. You might look at that agreement to see what cybersecurity capabilities they would offer for you as well, and look and see what the options are there. At least know what they would do in case they recognize a breach and who they would contact and how would you work with them, depending on the size of the deal you have. So don't assume a contract is too small. Third is, you pay insurance for a lot of things. So you might look at cybersecurity insurance. You may also want to look at, having a firm who you can call on in anticipation, sort of like Bob was talking about, such that you can have a call as you need arrangement with a firm that could come in and help you in time of need. And maybe that becomes an ongoing type of capability. But those are the first things that come off, to my mind about how you would approach this. I would also think about if you're just using technology at home, and more of us have a lot of technology, whether it's smart home or whether it's multiple devices, networks, things like that. You have to think about, what would you do if you had an issue in your own home? If you noticed that you had been breached on your computer, you may have to come up. You have to come up to a skill set and training as well as to what you might do, and so it may change your backup strategy. May change it so that you're backing up your critical data, so that recovery is less onerous. So you have to kind of think in terms of what your own situation might be as well. And those are my words of whatever they are, wisdom or experience.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you for all that. But hey, Bob, what goes into a cybersecurity incident response plan?
Well, I think the steps to get there it can be diverse. It depends on the size of the company, the industry, the threats that are probable. But the first step would be to go through and do a complete risk assessment, where you can find where you could be targeted, how you're going to be targeted. Then identify the key team members. I think we've heard this from a couple of the panelists before. Get those key stakeholders and partner with them on putting together the pre-planning and a nice solid plan. You can define the security incidents. I think Jim had mentioned this earlier. What is an incident? A lot of times somebody will get some malware on a machine, which doesn't necessarily trigger an event. IT can usually take care of that. But at what level does that become an incident? Ransomware, advanced persistent threat, etc. I would say, get with PR and make sure that you pre-can some messages based on the probability of the events and prepare for it. And the biggest thing is, once you have a plan in place, you need to run through practice sessions on a regular basis, whether that's twice a year, once a year. I'd say minimum once a year, to make sure that you're covering new employees and that they're aware of it and have the chance to participate in it. So those are some of the high level, but there's a much deeper dive that's needed if you're coming up with a cybersecurity incident response plan.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for all of this. We have 13 minutes left. I wanted to check in to see if anyone had any questions for the panelists. And so if you can put it on chat, we can move over to Q&A. I have a question for you guys, because we have a lot of different range of experiences here, both small business and large business. What are some examples you've seen of good responses? Roberto, if you don't mind kicking it off, just in any crisis situation, doesn't matter.
Thank you. Probably one of the best examples that comes to mind happened early on in my advertising career. And some of you may have heard of this. One of my clients, Tylenol, had bottles of their product laced with cyanide. And you might even remember that 7 people were killed in Chicago in a 3-day period between September 29 and October 2nd in 1982. And so the company was so quick to respond. What they did is they immediately distributed warnings to hospitals, distributors, and they stopped all Tylenol production and advertising. And right after that, there were some lookalike strychnine added to Tylenol from bottles in California. So it was spreading. So they did an immediate nationwide recall, and that was October 5th. They did a nationwide recall, and they collected 30 million bottles of Tylenol, which back then were worth about $100 million. So if you figure today, that's almost $300 million. And on top of that, the company advertised in national media, telling their consumers, not to consume anything that they made that had acetaminophen in it. And then they offered to exchange bottles for any consumer that you had, and they replaced it with tablets. On top of that, they created what's now the tamper-proof packaging that's so annoying every time you buy anything from a pharmacy. So they totally responded immediately. They put their money where their mouth was. They made some major changes, and consumers did not lose faith in them. They were as popular as ever, and they did not lose any business. They actually gained business.
Wow, it's so important to take really critical action, right as it happens. And can't imagine how many people needed to come together to make that decision as fast as they did. That's an incredible story.
If I can just add to that, one thing that I found, I was fortunate because at Blizzard we had an excellent PR team, but for smaller companies that have PR teams that may not have experience with crisis and how to respond to it and how to actually communicate outside the organization and inside the organization. I think those are some partners that you should seek out and help plan those type of things, because in an event like that, you want to make sure there's a way to communicate and there's a way not to communicate. And you really need that experience to make sure that the communication is going out properly and it's going to be received properly.
Great points. Great points. All right. Any other last minute thoughts that you guys want to say to?
If I could help out a little bit, Henry, one thing is that there's a cost of not staying current. And so if you're not applying, if you have computers and you're not applying patches to the operating system or to the key applications, you're opening up more risk for, easy attacks, quite frankly. And people take that for granted because they don't see it all the time. And so I think that sometimes you have to take some very basic steps to protect yourself. And that's one very basic step. Keep as current as you feasibly can. That keeps the cyber attacks at bay. Most companies are dealing with other vendors' products, whether it's Microsoft or it's Apple or whoever, and they do put out quite a bit of updates, and so my recommendation is people really take those seriously.
Yeah, no, great point. And some wrap-in thoughts. A lot of this is like the playbook that comes to mind is referencing sports is not like a baseball playbook. This is like a football playbook, right? This isn't something that you can huddle, play one play after another and figure out what you want to do with some good time in between. As soon as that happens, that crisis happens, people should know what they are doing from beginning to end, and not a lot of huddling, right? Not a lot of huddling to plan for things. And so, it's like a football play, and, it's not a lot of time that you have. And the time that you have from that breach being found out to remediating it could cost you, hundreds, if not millions of dollars, if not acted upon quickly. And so, hopefully what we've outlined here will help you guys. What we found over at Pandoblox is, this is one of those things that is really hard to do internally, not just because from a resource standpoint, experience standpoint, but it's because everyone's so busy working on things, day to day focus, all the business strategies that you have. I can guarantee you security is not in that business strategy, right? Unless you're a security company. And so, it's not just about having the experience. It's about having someone come in to make sure that it gets done and make sure that it's just one of those things that need to get done. Also just having a second set of eyes really helps. And oftentimes we find ourselves to be more of a guide than anything else, than consultants coming in and doing checkbox type work. So would love to work with you in whatever capacity you'd like. There's a lot of resources we have to share with you. We'll send some out to the people who had registered, and would love to set up some time to go over things. Any last things before we wrap up? All right, well, thank you everyone for joining. This was great. We had a lot of good content in here. I'm glad we were recording this, and hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Thank you all for joining. And until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.